Hey everybody, welcome back to Race of History. Sorry the video is a little bit late today getting out. I had a couple things I had to do today. I had to go to a couple meetings, so I'm just now getting time to do it. But we're going to do the Sabaton History on the Battle of Berlin. We did the song Attero Dominatus yesterday. We're going to do the Sabaton History for it today. I've been told that there is a connection between this and Hearts of Iron, I believe. I think that was the song that gave the other perspective for the Battle of Berlin. Um, if that's not it, somebody correct me. But that's that's a pretty cool idea to have the two different songs that are giving different perspectives on the same battle. So that's an interesting thing to me. But anyway, let's go ahead and jump into it.
I'm Indy Nidell.
And I'm Pat from Sabaton, and this is Sabaton History.
The Battle of Berlin in 1945 saw Hitler's suicide and the surrender of the German capital.
And we wrote a song called Attero Dominatus about that.
In the winter of 1941 and 42, when the German army was driven back from the gates of Moscow, the Soviet troops who had survived the first disastrous months of the German invasion brought with them Soviet cameramen, whose footage gave the world its first look at what the Germans had done in Russia. The film they produced, known in the West as Moscow Strikes Back, was described by the New York Times Review as follows. The villages are not villages, but charred honeycombs of little low walls that once were houses, schools, or even cathedrals. But infinitely more terrible are the charnel heaps of twisted grotesques that no longer resemble human beings, the naked and slaughtered children stretched out in ghastly rows, the youths dangling limply in the cold from gallows that were rickety but strong enough. Among them wander the living mothers, their faces set in friezes of grief, and sometimes a Red Army soldier gazing on the broken bodies with a silence like flame. Over the next 3 years of fighting, any soldier fortunate enough to survive that ordeal had seen scenes like that time and again. In April 1945, those soldiers arrived at the gates of Berlin.
Yeah, and that's what I was referencing at the end of the video for the song. The Soviets were not going to finish this war without gaining their entire pound of flesh from the Germans. They just the cost of the war was just too high for them to not kind of want their revenge. And that's kind of understandable.
We stand at the gates of Berlin with 2.5 million men. With 6,000 tanks in our ranks, we use them as battering rams.
By the beginning of that year, Western and Soviet armies were converging on Germany. For the past 3.5 years, though, the main brunt of the fighting had been borne by the Soviet Red Army. Although the figure varies between 8 and 20 million, it is estimated that around 15 million Soviet soldiers were killed by the end of the war. That figure does not count the many millions of dead Soviet civilians. In February 1945, the Allied leaders met at Yalta to discuss what would happen with Germany post-war. And they agreed that Germany would be divided into 4 occupation zones, British, American, French, and Soviet, and that Berlin, the capital, would likewise be carved up into 4 sectors. Despite this, and as the victorious outcome of the war began to appear more and more certain, mistrust between the Allies had begun to grow, and military leaders on both sides feared that words on paper would mean little without boots on the ground to back them up. Joseph Stalin organized a general Soviet offensive to drive as far into Germany as possible and played upon the rivalry between his 2 top commanders, Georgy Zhukov and Ivan Konev, by encouraging them to compete with one another to win the glory of capturing Berlin. In the West, Winston Churchill reportedly urged General Dwight Eisenhower to attempt to capture the city. But Eisenhower eventually decided against such an operation, not wishing to expend Allied lives capturing more and more territory which the Allies had already agreed at Yalta to give to the Soviets, and fearing friendly fire between Western and Soviet forces. So, as the Soviet forces advanced on Berlin, Eisenhower ordered the Western armies to halt on the Elbe and Mulde rivers and focus on mopping up the remaining German forces on their northern and southern flanks.
Yeah, from my understanding of this, it's not solely a loss of life proposition. There are a couple of different reasons that Eisenhower decides that he's going to kind of move around the countryside instead of making this straight line to Berlin. But all the same, it is the decision he comes to.
The German army in 1945 was by now a shadow of its former self, reduced in part to old men and boys. Nevertheless, they fought on, each for his own reasons. What can be said with certainty is that most everyone was afraid of the Russians, afraid of what would happen to them in Russian captivity.
Yep, I talked about this in the Sweden-German Blitzkrieg video, but yeah, everybody's kind of got their eyes on the Soviet Union for one reason or another. Everybody is either afraid to deal with them or extremely distrustful of them. Or, the Soviets are the giant elephant in the room, particularly once the war seems like its fate has been decided.
Afraid of what would happen to their families once the Russians were given the opportunity for revenge. Those veterans remaining from the campaigns in the East who had seen and perhaps taken part in the atrocities there had little reason to doubt the rumors of impending Soviet vengeance.
The price of all war must be paid. Millions of lives has been lost. The price must be paid by the men that started a war in the 30s.
The Red Army operations took the shape of two great offensive lunges. The first was the Vistula-Oder offensive from January 12th to February 2nd. Zhukov advanced in the center, while Konev advanced in the south. Following this, Soviet forces moved rapidly across Poland until they halted along the lines of the Oder and Nisse rivers, with bridgeheads established across the Oder some 70 kilometers east of Berlin. Although the city was undefended at this time, Zhukov gave the order to halt, as his northern flank was threatened by the German Second Army. Clearing out these forces was accomplished between February 24th and April 4th, with the Second Army being surrounded and mostly destroyed in Gdansk. With his northern flank secure, Zhukov could now prepare for the final frontal assault towards Berlin. However, the delay had given the Germans time to rebuild their defenses along the Oder River. On March 20th, German General Gotthard Heinrici was appointed commander of them. He assumed that the main Soviet thrust would be across the river along the axis of the main east-west Autobahn. Being vastly outnumbered, he planned a defense in depth, deploying only light forces along the riverbanks, while the main defensive position was established on the Zilov Heights, overlooking the road 17 kilometers to the west of the river. German engineers turned the Oder's floodplain into a marsh by breaching a reservoir, while on the heights they constructed 3 defensive belts with lines of trenches, bunkers, anti-tank guns, and ditches. As expected, Zhukov concentrated his attack on the section of the line opposite the Zilov Heights, but the overall redeployment left gaps in the Soviet lines, allowing what little remained of the German Second Army to escape to the west. The Red Army forces had between them 2.5 million men, 6,000 tanks, and over 7,500 aircraft. They were opposed by about 760,000 Germans of Army Group Vistula in the north and Army Group Center in the south, with about 1,500 tanks and 2,200 aircraft between them. The Berlin strategic offensive began April 16th with a massive artillery barrage against the German positions.
Marshal Zhukov's orders serve even on the plains. Disregard the losses the cities asked to take.
Despite their advantage in firepower and numbers, though, advancing proved difficult for Zhukov's 1st and Rokossovsky's 2nd Belarusian fronts in the marshlands created by the German engineers. Frustrated and behind schedule, Zhukov threw in his reserves, committing to massed human wave assaults, which led to heavy Soviet casualties. Meanwhile, Konev's first...
I've talked about this before, but the Soviets in a lot of cases, view manpower like any other resource. Like it's just another, it's oil or it's firearms or it's whatever. It's a resource that is to be used or replenished or whatever. You know, it's how they view it in a lot of cases.
Ukrainian front had made progress in the south against weaker opposition by Army Group Center, and following the capture of Forst on April 18th, the remaining elements of the German 9th and 4th Panzer Armies defending the Zilov Heights were forced to withdraw or risk being outflanked from the south. But their withdrawal left the way open for Zhukov, who now moved to trap the German forces in a pincer movement with Konev's front. As for the Western Allies, they had halted on the Elbe River. Thanks to captured documents, the Germans knew that they were unlikely to advance any further in the immediate future. Hitler ordered General Walter Wenck's 12th Army, currently fighting the Americans, to head east to link up with the 9th Army as it retreated west, after which the two armies together would relieve Berlin. However, by April 23rd, the 9th Army had been completely cut off, as we saw in the episode Hearts of Iron about Walter Wenck. And by the 24th, the encirclement of Berlin was complete. Wenck chose to force open a corridor which would allow the breakout of the 9th Army and the evacuation of civilians from the city, then to make for the western lines with as many civilians as they could bring with them and surrender to the Americans. On April 22nd, Hitler had ordered General Helmut Weidling to be shot for allegedly retreating from the enemy. As it turned out, Weidling had not in fact retreated, and when he showed up at the Führer bunker to tell Adolf Hitler that much, Hitler was apparently impressed, and the next day, he appointed Weidling as the commander of the Berlin defense zone. Weidling had under his command a motley assortment of approximately 45,000 Wehrmacht and Waffen-SS troops, 40,000 Volkssturm militia, and various other units formed from the Hitler Jugend and local police. They were surrounded
But Steiner will come and relieve them.
by around 1.5 million Soviet troops. The result was 9 days of brutal house-to-house fighting, during which the German forces, though massively outnumbered and also outgunned, still managed to inflict heavy casualties on the Soviet attackers. The two Soviet fronts attacking Berlin, having collaborated to achieve the encirclement, promptly resumed their competition with renewed vigor, each fighting to reach the city center before the other. Adolf Hitler, having chosen to remain in the city rather than flee, committed suicide on April 30th. General Wilding ordered the remainder of the garrison to attempt to break out towards their western front lines. A handful would successfully surrender to the Allies, while the majority were killed or captured by the Soviets. On May the 2nd, General Wilding ordered those units who remained in the city of Berlin to surrender, and he surrendered to Soviet General Vasily Chuikov in person and in writing that morning. Chuikov's 8th Guards Army was part of Zhukov's 1st Belarusian Front. As the Soviet army entered the ruined city, the civilian population was subjected to a wave of rape, pillage, and murder which continued for several weeks. While the exact figures are far from certain, it is believed that civilian deaths exceeded 125,000, though the extent to which these figures were attributable to what would today be called collateral damage rather than simple murder cannot be determined. Additionally, approximately 100,000 women were raped in Berlin out of approximately 2 million raped in the entire country during the final 6 months of the war.
Jesus.
On the other hand, it should be noted that under the direction of Zhukov, efforts were made both during and after the battle to ensure that the civilian population of the city was provided for and that vital services were restored. German military deaths in the course of the whole operation totaled around 100,000, while the Soviets suffered approximately 80,000 killed and an additional 280,000 wounded. The end of the Battle of Berlin was shortly followed by Germany's unconditional surrender. On May the 6th at Rheims, Alfred Jodl offered to surrender all forces fighting the Western Allies, but Eisenhower told him it must be all forces on all fronts, or the Western Allies would close their lines and all surrendering would be done to the Soviets. Admiral Karl Dönitz, leader of Germany after Hitler's death, authorized that, and just after midnight, Jodl signed it. The next day, German representatives went to Berlin and signed another surrender in front of Zhukov, whose army had won the race to Berlin. Ironically, however, Konev would have the last laugh. The glory of Zhukov's many victories turned out to be too much for Stalin's taste, and within a year, Zhukov had been banished from Moscow, first to command the Odessa district and then the Urals district, though he would be rehabilitated after the death of Stalin. Konev, meanwhile, enjoyed a long, successful, and uninterrupted career. The Western Allies, despite having occupied more of Germany than their Yalta allocation,
Yeah, Stalin has a difficult relationship with military generals and the military hierarchy in general.
chose to honor the agreement and withdraw to the agreed-upon boundaries. And in turn, Soviet Union would allow them to occupy their assigned portions of Berlin.
Berlin becomes a city of darkness as all ground communication is severed and industry comes to a standstill.
Attero Dominatus. Berlin is burning. Denique interimo. The night has fallen.
In the song, in the lyrics, you sing "Berlin is burning." Now, have you ever played this in Berlin?
Yes, of course we have. Sabaton has been performing everywhere in the world, and we didn't really take that much of offense when people said, "Oh, this song maybe it's too sensitive to perform in Berlin." But there was some promoters earlier who said, "Well, this is your show in Berlin, but don't play the song Attero Dominatus."
Promoters are always worried about stuff like that.
They're worried about politics sometimes, that we are there. I mean, I told you about the story when we went to Russia and a local politician thought we're gonna burn the flag. It was similar idea the first time we came to Berlin. Like, you're gonna play the song Attero Dominatus and burn the German flag on the stage? And it was
why
like...
Why do people think these things of you? What have you ever done that would imply that you were going to do that?
I could understand. I mean, in 2006, as this song was released, Sabaton was not that, well known.
Right.
And we didn't have too many fans who would kind of defend us and tell Sabaton is not about politics, they tell stories. The whole thing about it was basically like this. We had our first tour in Europe, thanks to the album Primo Victoria. We are supporting the bands Ed Guy and Dragon Force. And
honestly, I kind of understand it. If you're a heavy metal group that your songs are about war, but the promoter or the local politicians don't know really anything about you, what would you think they were coming to sing about? Because if all I knew was that they were a heavy metal group that sang about war, my guess would be they were a very anti-war group. That, like, their whole thing was anti-war, which is not their thing. They just, like he said, they tell stories. They really give a cool, interesting perspective to these historical events. But if you didn't know that, and all you knew, you would think, like, I don't know, Rage Against the Machine or something. Like, it would just, I can understand where the thought process would come from.
And at this time, the label says, we might be able to cover some of your costs on this tour if you make another album before you go out.
Okay.
And we really had to rush the album Attero Dominatus.
And what about the video for Attero Dominatus?
The video, it was our first official music video.
Yeah.
We did it with Uwe, who was a director from the band Nocturnal Rites. We didn't know what to expect at all. And he was like, you need to bring some cooler clothes than what you are wearing normally, because before this, we were wearing leather pants and leather jackets, and that's our stage clothes.
Standard uniform.
Yeah. Joachim bought this vest on a show in England, and just walking around, he saw that this could fit. It looks like a kind of military thing.
Yeah.
And then we thought about, okay, we get kind of a uniform. It was for the video shoot. And a couple of months later, we were sitting down at Sweden Rock Festival, and we were watching it together with some friends. And we were all like, damn, wow.
Yeah, they were like, hell yeah, this is what we're wearing from now on. Joachim's vest looks awesome.
It's a simple video,
Yeah.
but we love the energy in it. And we love the look. So we kept the look.
And these are my favorite part of these. I love these. I always like that. All right, ladies and gentlemen, well, that is all for today, but we will see you next time and every time on Sabaton History.
Attero Dominatus, Berlin is burning. Denique interimum, the Reich has fallen.
All right, so that is Sabaton History for Attero Dominatus. Yeah, another really great one. Like I said, the perspective with this and Hearts of Iron is just a really cool thing for them to do. Their first music video, that's actually pretty awesome. But yeah, the whole thing was great. Indy's always great on these. So I will put the link to the Discord down below. On the Discord, we have a YouTube recommendation thing. So if there's something you want me to see and you're afraid I won't see it on YouTube, you can go on there and put it in that one, and I for sure will see it, and most other people will probably reference it too. So I'll put that link to the Discord down in the description box below. As always, like, comment, subscribe. Help me keep building the channel over here, and I will see you all next time.